They carried their bags over to a table and put them down. Let's get in line, some said. A woman sitting several feet away said, never walk away from anything around here unless you got eyes in the back of your head. Some went to pick up their stuff, and the woman murmured, ah, go on, I'll watch it for you. Name's Velma. Thank you so much. Some tried to smile. As the pearls waited, someone in front of them scolded her young son. You stand nice now, or I'll smack you. Hard. Here? I've about had it. The boy froze, looking up at his mother every few seconds. Juby stood very quietly behind him. Breakfast was served on a heavy paper plate with a plastic fork and spoon. It was pancakes, an orange, a slice of ham, and a small box of raisins. The kids ate. Some picked at her food. Velma looked over at her. You'll get used to it, she said. Better eat. No lunch for hours. No snacks. Where you from? Woodlawn, some said. Oh, I've been in that facility there, the woman said, rolling her eyes. I was in there for ages, getting clean, bad times, lost my kids, but I'm doing much better. Now, I'm getting some classes, gonna get me a job that pays, get my babies back. That's great, some mumbled, but her face said something else. Early hoped some wouldn't say any more. They didn't fit here, but for purposes of survival, it might be better not to show it. Every kid who went into a new grade with an unfamiliar teacher and class at the start of the school year knew this. Some had been taken care of by Dash for so long now that she might have forgotten. Early poked her mom. Be friendly, she whispered. Some gave her a squeeze, then turned and said, I'm Summer, and these here are my kids, Early and Jubilation. Them's nice names, Velma nodded. Whoa, men, women, a guard at one side of the room called out, and a long line of single women, mostly older, formed a line behind the families, vouchers in hand. Velma stood and walked slowly toward the group, then paused to call back over her shoulder. Hold my seat and I'll be back. Some gave her a wave. Will do. The group moved forward with hardly a word spoken, many of the faces looking deeply lonely. Early couldn't help thinking of how much chatting happened in other lines, like those at a grocery store or bus stop. The guard now called out, And the men! A ripple of shuffling feet and low voices gathered in a line that snaked almost out of sight. When Velma returned with her plate, some gave her a smile, then asked, What's the best way to get help around here? Like money for a cell phone. The woman raised her fork in a circle and waved. Keep asking, she said. You can see how many are in tough times, but just keep asking. And stay sweet. A little sugar takes you further than gas, if you got my meaning. She laughed with her mouth closed, a kind rumble from deep inside. You don't have to be driving the car to get where you want to go. TAMF can be real helpful with bus and train tickets. Maybe a phone once you get a job or signed up for classes. Things like that. Be a squeaky wheel, but talk nice, some nodded. Smart. You got it, honey. Velma leaned close and gave her a warm smile. She was missing both front teeth. Need any advice? Just ask. I'm usually in here most meal times. When Velma stood to leave, Early noticed that the woman had a bad limp and men's army boots on. She also had a too small pink scarf around her neck, the kind usually worn by a little girl. Cling. The director at Helping Hand, Mrs. Happity, had bouncy gray hair and colorful butterfly earrings, but no other jewelry. Deep lines crisscrossed her forehead. Okay, if your kids come into the Okay, if your kids come into the office with us? She asked. Absolutely, some said. Excuse our messy hair. We don't have a brush with us. Left in kind of a hurry last night. Miss Happity waved one plump hand. Please, not a problem, and I'll give you a hygiene kit in a moment, and you can all get cleaned up. Some told her the story, beginning with Dasher's disappearance. The director took notes. So, in terms of what you need immediately, it's access to a phone so you can set up appointments and some transportation passes so you can get around. The shelter phone may be your best bet for a while. I'm afraid there's a long list for cell phone contracts. Okay, Slim said. So, do we have a home that is until the end of the month if we don't pay the landlord? So we do have a home, that is, until the end of the month if we don't pay the landlord, but that doesn't even matter now because it's been destroyed. Some stopped. There was a moment of silence. Maybe we don't have a home anymore, she said, her voice barely audible. The landlord will probably take the rest of this month's rent to cover the wreckage. One step at a time, Mrs. Happity said. Once you're employed or signed up for job training, we can get you on a list that will eventually move you from the shelter into subsidized housing. I can connect you with childcare options, but meanwhile, you three will be fed and out of the weather. Now, your daughter. While you're figuring out what choices you have, we can bus her back to Woodlawn to her school, or she can attend around the corner. There's a very nice school that a lot of our kids here choose to go to. All school expenses, like field trips and meals, will be covered as long as you're in one of the city shelters. Some looked at Early. I don't want you to have to leave your friends, but I'm not sure we want to be worrying about a long bus ride. What do you think? Early thought the closer she stayed to some in Juby, the better. I'll go to school here, for now, Early said. Mrs. Happity nodded approvingly, and Some told her, Thanks for getting Early set up. Do I have to go right away? Early asked. Mrs. Happity said, Better to stay busy, dear. You don't want to get behind. I'll make some calls and see if we can get you in this week. Meanwhile, shelter meals are on a strict schedule. Families with children are first in line, followed by those from the women's and then men's shelter across the street. There's a weekly sign up for cleaning the bathrooms on your floor. Lights out and no talking or noise or any kind in the dormitory area after 9. Fighting, argumentative behavior, or substance abuse will land you out the door in a split second. No worries about that, Some said faintly. Early imagined that her mother was picturing each of these things happening, just as Early was. Mrs. Happity was trying to be careful, but what she was saying was also scary. Here's what to expect. In case you're with us for a bit, if you and your kids are well behaved, we'll put you on the list for a private room to sleep in. That is, if you need to stay the full 12 weeks we offer or even a little longer. Meanwhile, there are a lot of families to make friends with here, and I'm always around. Any guard can page me. If one of you gets sick, we'll connect you with medical care. Chicago Hopes, a wonderful after school tutoring organization, keeps a room here with books and games in it. Place to get homework help and some one on one attention. All your kids have to do is show up, no planning involved. Also, you'll be meeting with counselors on a bi weekly basis. They'll help you make a plan that'll get you back on the road to independent living. Half an hour later, they were taken to a bed and dresser cluster in a low open room the size of a basketball court on the second floor. The floor was chipped, worn linoleum, gray with streaks of red. Cloud shaped stains, brown instead of white, drifted across the ceiling overhead, the shades broken here and there by a bar of neon light. Supplies included sheets for the 2 sets of bunk beds, 3 brown blankets sealed in plastic, 2 white towels, 2 rolls of toilet paper, and 3 plastic kits with the toothbrush, toothpaste, mouthwash, a small brush, a comb, and a bottle of liquid clothes detergent inside. The windows in the room were small and covered with broken blinds that hung at jagged angles. A female guard sat on a chair in the corner. So, this is your cluster, Mrs. Happity said. Make yourselves comfortable. Oh my, Some said. Thank you. Wish we had our own things from home so that we wouldn't have to lend us all this. So that you wouldn't have to lend us all this. Where do we store our stuff? Here, Mrs. Happity said, in the dresser, carry any jewelry or money on your person. Breakfast starts for families at 6:30, lunch at 11:30, dinner at 4:30. Each meal lasts for 1 hour. Second servings on holidays only. You can hang your towels over the end of the beds to dry. There's a washer and dryer on the first floor. Know where your kids are at all times and never leave the shelter without them. Boys older than 10 aren't allowed inside this open sleeping area. Boys 12 and up aren't allowed to stay in the family area of the shelter at all. You can use the shelter phone to make 15 minutes of calls anytime between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. But sometimes there are lines. Local calls only is just the upstairs on the third floor. It's just up the stairs on the third floor, and patience and politeness go a long way. Everyone's call is important. Exhausted after their night in the police station, Julie lay down on one of the bare mattresses and immediately fell asleep. Seeing that her mother was near tears, Early patted her on the back, although she felt like crying too. This big, spooky, open room with a lot of strangers? A new school? I feel sad too, some, she said. Her mother sat right up. Of course you do, she said. I'm so sorry. Let's get ourselves settled in here. We'll wake Juby in an hour or so, and meanwhile we can freshen up. You go first. Walking across the room to the bathroom, Early saw that some families had tied sheets around the sides of their bunk beds for privacy. Others had hung comforters or a shower curtain. The sleeping clusters looked like a bunch of kids' forts, something you do for fun if you had a bunk bed at home. The buzz of radios came from inside a few of the clusters. An occasional leg or arm was visible, hanging off a bed or holding a magazine. Early saw an ankle with a rose tattoo and the message "Live for Love" on it. A baby lay on a bunk, swatting at toys hung from the wire mesh above. A tiny girl with her hair ponytailed up in a pink frilly ribbon sat in a walker, rolling herself as far as a clothesline tied to the bunk would allow. She stopped to watch Early go by, popping one finger in her mouth when Early smiled at her. A boy Juby's age peeked out of a bed near the bathroom and pointed a wire coat hanger at her. Pow pow, gotcha, he said. She pointed her plastic hygiene kit back at him. Bang, she said. Delighted, he fell off the bed and rolled beneath it. Early then heard him being dragged out from under by an impatient voice and told to sit nice and behave. She then heard a slap followed by whimpering. She felt bad, having gotten him in trouble. She'd have to warn Juby. It didn't seem like play was allowed by some parents. Inside the bathroom, a woman muttered to herself as she washed her hands over and over. Not fair, she was saying. He didn't listen. Just turned and left. Left me all alone. I had to. Just had to do it. No choice. Not fair. Early hadn't realized she was staring until the woman looked up and said directly to her, Never believe him. Those wolves start with the nesting, and then when you get everything nice, they just go wandering. Always do in the end. Yes, ma'am, Early said, and hurried into the shower. She kept trying to shut the curtain firmly, but it drifted open. She saw the woman looking at her, just one eye reflected in the mirror over the row of sinks. Always do, she said again. As Early left the bathroom, the woman was still washing her hands over a full sink, the water puddling around her sneakers. Clutch. From the Middle English clutchen, verb to hold tightly, to grasp, sometimes suddenly. Noun, a nest of eggs, a brood of chicks. Clutch. The paper cover was torn, but its cheerful, familiar red was comforting, like a hug from an old friend. Amazingly, the green cloth binding beneath had made it through the attack in one piece, the spine now lumpy in places but still strong. Early stayed downstairs in the cluster while some went upstairs to call. There was no point in waking an exhausted Juby and making him wait in line. She sat on the edge of her bunk, holding the book. She heard Dash read the first book of rhythms many times and loved the smooth, rolling sound of the poet's language. Sometimes she'd heard her father say softly, What's the rhythm, Langston? While thinking over a problem or making a decision. She could picture him now, mop in hand, muttering the same question while washing the floor after dinner. He didn't have a parent or grandparent to give him advice, but Langston seemed to do just as well. Now Langston felt even more like a part of her family. Dash had told Early that his famous poet was a rainbow mix too, like some and probably Dash himself. Langston had African American, white, Jewish, and Native American roots, and like Dash, Langston had grown up without much love or a steady home. She patted the cover. Langston, she remembered that, saying with delight, had written the first book of rhythms after spending 3 months in Chicago working on poetry with kids at Lab, as everyone called it, a big and old school in the nearby neighborhood of Hyde Park. It was just blocks from their apartment. Maybe Langston had taken a walk into Woodlawn one day. Maybe he'd stroll right by their front door, long before Dash was born, and even past the house they later loved, the one with the cat in the window. Maybe he thought about dreams and rhythms while he walked. Early closed her eyes and whispered, What's the rhythm, Langston? Opening to a random page, she read.